Ukraine is important to the security of the United States. The largest country in Europe by landmass, Ukraine is a young democracy struggling to join Europe and ally itself with the United States. It has been violently attacked by Russia, which continues its armed aggression against Ukraine to this day. If we believe in the principle of the sovereignty of nations, on which our security and the security of our friends and allies depends, if we believe that nations get to decide on their own economic, political, and security alliances, we must support Ukraine in its fight against its bullying neighbor. Russian aggression cannot stand.
The witnesses.
Right, thank you,
Mr. Chairman, do you anticipate when we would vote on
What
that?
purpose does Mr. Jordan seek recognition?
Just to ask a clarifying question, do you anticipate when we might vote on the ability to have the whistleblower in front of us, something you, of the 435 members of Congress, you are the only member who knows who that individual is, and your staff is the only staff of any member of Congress who's had a chance to talk with that individual. We would like that opportunity. When might that happen in this proceeding today?
First, as the gentleman knows, that's a false statement. I do not know the identity of the whistleblower, and I'm determined to make sure that identity is protected. But as I said to Mr. Conaway, you'll have an opportunity after the witnesses testify to make a motion to subpoena any witness and compel a vote. And with that, I now recognize the witnesses.
Ambassador Taylor, in your decades of military service and diplomatic service representing the United States around the world, have you ever seen another example of foreign aid conditioned on the personal or political interests of the President of the United States?
No, Mr. Goldman, I've not.
Regardless of what Ukrainians may say now that everything is out in the public and we're here in this public hearing, that they felt no pressure from President Trump, it was your clear understanding, was it not, that in early September, when the pressure campaign was still secret, that the Ukrainians believed that they needed to announce these public investigations? Is that right?
Mr. Goldman, I know that the Ukrainians were very concerned about the security assistance. And I know that they were prepared or preparing to make a public statement, that is, with a CNN interview, that was being planned. Those are the two pieces that I know.
And that CNN interview was to announce these investigations as you understood it, right?
That was the implication. That was certainly the implication. As the committee is aware, I wrote that withholding security assistance in exchange for help with a domestic political campaign in the United States would be crazy. I believed that then, and I believe it now. In a regular NSC secure video conference call on July 18th, I heard a staff person from the Office of Management and Budget say that there was a hold on security assistance to Ukraine, but could not say why. Toward the end of an otherwise normal meeting, a voice on the call, the person was off screen, said that she was from OMB, and her boss had instructed her not to approve any additional spending on security assistance for Ukraine until further notice. I and others sat in astonishment. The Ukrainians were fighting Russians and counted on not only the training and weapons, but also the assurance of U.S. support. Very concerned, on that same day, September 1st, I sent Ambassador Sondland a text message asking if we are now saying that the security assistance and a White House meeting are conditioned on investigations. Ambassador Sondland responded asking me to call him, which I did. During that phone call, Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him that he wants President Zelensky to state publicly that Ukraine will investigate Burisma and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. I thought that the pressure on another president, on President Zelensky, was not a good idea from either president's standpoint. So I suggested in that phone call with Ambassador Sondland that he, since he frequently had conversation with the president, could make that point.
Well, and I think the way you express yourself is you wanted Sondland to push back on President Trump's demand, right?
Yes, sir.
So was your understanding from talking to Sondland, this is what the president wanted him to do, and you wanted Sondland to push back?
I asked Ambassador Sondland to push back. That's correct.
And in fact, even after the aid was ultimately released. Even after the White House learns of the whistleblower complaint and the congressional investigation, the aid is released. Even after those events, you were still worried that Zelensky was going to feel it necessary to go on CNN and announce these investigations, were you not?
Mr. Chairman, I was still worried that he might do that. So yes, I thought that would be a bad idea. And so when there was some indication that there might still be a plan for the CNN interview in New York, which was upcoming at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, I was worried. I wanted to be sure that that didn't happen, so I addressed it with the Zelensky staff.
And I think you said earlier that Dan Liuk, the National Security Advisor then for Zelensky, was concerned Zelensky didn't want to be used as some tool in American politics. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
So Zelensky didn't want to go on TV and announce political investigations that he thought would mire him in U.S. politics, right?
He knew that, he and his advisors knew that it's a bad idea to interject, to interfere in other nations' elections. Yes, sir.
But nonetheless, it appeared until the aid was lifted, the hold was lifted, that he felt compelled to do it.
He was making plans, his staff was making plans to have him make some kind of announcement, I don't know what it would have been, on CNN in public.
Even though he didn't want to be marred in U.S. politics.
Even though he knew it was a bad idea to interfere in other people's elections. Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?
And Ambassador Sondland responded, "Call me."
He did.
Now, what information had you learned that prompted you to write this text message?
I had learned that in Warsaw, after the meeting Vice President Pence had with President Zelensky, Ambassador Sondland had had meetings there and had described to Mr. Yermak, the assistant to President Zelensky, that the security assistance was also held pending announcement by President Zelensky in public of these investigations. Before that, I had only understood from Ambassador Sondland that the White House meeting was conditioned. And at this time, after I heard of this conversation, it struck me, it was clear to me that security assistance was also being held.
You said previously that you were alarmed to learn this. Why were you alarmed?
It's one thing to try to leverage a meeting in the White House. It's another thing, I thought, to leverage security assistance to a country at war, dependent on both the security assistance and the demonstration of support. It was much more alarming. The White House meeting was one thing, security assistance was much more alarming. Last Friday, a member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th. While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff, at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information. I'm including it here for completeness. As the committee knows, I reported this information through counsel to the State Department's legal advisor, as well as to counsel for both the majority and the minority of this committee. It is my understanding that the committee is following up on this matter.
You said in your testimony that one of your staff was present with Ambassador Sondland on the day after the July 25th phone call. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And as your staff related the event to you, your staff member could overhear Mr. Sondland on the phone, could overhear the president on the phone with Mr. Sondland. Is that right?
That's correct.
So the president must have been speaking loud enough on the phone. This was a cell phone, I take it?
It was a cell phone.
The president must have been speaking loud enough for your staff member to be able to overhear this?
It was.
And what your staff member could overhear was President Trump asking Ambassador Sondland about, quote, the investigations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, I think you testified also that you had come to understand that the term investigations was a term that Ambassador Sondland, as well as Volker, used to mean matters related to the 2016 elections and to the investigations of Burisma and the Bidens. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
So your staff member overhears the president asking about the investigations, meaning Burisma and the Bidens in 2016. And Ambassador Sondland told President Trump that the Ukrainians were ready to move forward?
He did.
And I think you said that after the call, when your staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought of Ukraine, his response was that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden. Is that right?
And Burisma, yes, sir.
And I take it the import of that is he cares more about that than he does about Ukraine.
Yes, sir.